Good morning, Pa. Happy Christmas Eve. I was thinking about it, and I thought that Nathan and Laylee might be interested, so I invited them to start listening in too. But if they can think of others who might be interested, like, I guess Natalie might be interested. Well, anyways, yeah, you can just spread it to whoever would like the unprofessional reading of a book early in the morning. I hope you've enjoyed all the other ones so far, Nathan and Natalie. But yeah, so I'll just keep continuing and like normal. So just enjoy my reading and commentary. I hope it teaches you things, because it sure is teaching me things. All right, here we go. Chapter 3, Translating the Nephite Record. After showing the character facsimile to Anton and other scholars, Martin Harris returned home to Palmyra in February or March of 1828. He then, in company with his wife, Lucy Harris, journeyed to Harmony, Pennsylvania, to return the character transcript to Joseph Smith and report on what the scholar had been able and unable to tell him. With the learned having failed to read the characters, the task of translation fell to Joseph alone, and Martin effectively implored Joseph, as he had the linguistic scholars read this, I pray thee. It may be at this time, as Joseph's 1832 history and the Book of Mormon's extensive text of Isaiah 29 imply, that Joseph discovered he could interpret the characters himself by scrutinizing them through the spectacles, or interpreters, he had found with the plates. In Harmony, Lucy reportedly made herself a nuisance by insisting that she must see the plates, and eventually ransacking every nook and corner about the house, chests, trunks, cupboards, etc., and searching the nearby woods in order to get a glimpse of the plates. Oh dear. You can see Lavina Fielding Anderson's edition of Lucy's book, a critical edition of Lucy Mack Smith's family memoir. After 2 weeks, Martin took Lucy home for a much-deserved rest. There, he planned another trip to Harmony, this time alone. Though he had recently traveled to Harmony, Philadelphia, and New York City, then back to Palmyra, back to Harmony, and back yet again to Palmyra, Martin now arranged his affairs so that he could return to make a more extended stay in Harmony and serve as Joseph's scribe for the translation effort. You can see that in Anderson's book. While Martin arranged things at home in March and into mid-April 1828, Joseph was not idle. Whatever preliminary study of the characters he may have made in earlier months, he now translated in earnest, dictating the first stories of the Book of Lehi, not to the imminently expected Martin, but to the immediately present Emma. Her identity as the scribe for the first portion of the book is indicated by her recollections of the translation. Quote, "When my husband was translating the Book of Mormon, I wrote part of it, as he dictated each sentence word for word, and when he came to proper names he could not pronounce, or long words, he spelled them out. Even the word Sariah he could not pronounce at first, but had to spell it, and I would pronounce it for him." Unquote. Oh no, wait. Continuation of the quote. When he stopped for any purpose at any time, he would, when he commenced again, begin where he left off, without any hesitation. And one time, while he was translating, he stopped suddenly, pale as a sheet, and said, "Emma, did Jerusalem have walls around it?" When I answered, "Yes," he replied, "Oh, I was afraid I had been deceived." He had such a limited knowledge of history at the time that he did not even know that Jerusalem was surrounded by walls. End quote. And you can find that in Emma Smith Bideman's interviewed by Emma Smith Bideman interviewed by Edmund C. Briggs in Edmund C. Briggs' A Visit to Nauvoo in 1856. These incidents underscored for the educated Emma how unlearned she believed her husband to be, and thus, now divinely aided, he must have been in dictating the complex Book of Mormon text. Her account also points to the content then under translation. Joseph would have first encountered and struggled to pronounce the name of Lehi's wife, Sariah, not in 1st Nephi, but at the opening of the lost pages. In any case, the handwriting in the original manuscript when Sariah's name is first used in 1st Nephi is not Emma's, but Oliver Cowdery's. Similarly, the walls of Jerusalem would not have been first mentioned in 1st Nephi, but again, early in the lost pages. The handwriting when Jerusalem's walls are first mentioned in 1st Nephi is also not Emma's, and is likely that of one of the Whitmer brothers. See Royal Skousen, the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, typographical facsimile of the extant text. Furthermore, 1st Nephi was translated in June of 1829, after Joseph moved from Harmony, Pennsylvania, to Fayette, New York. Emma did not immediately accompany him in this move, but joined him later, making it impossible for her to have been the scribe for early 1st Nephi. Footnote 5 says, of Joseph and Oliver Cowdery's late May 1829 move to Fayette, New York, Lucy Mack Smith wrote, Joseph and Oliver set out without delay, leaving Emma to take charge of affairs during her husband's absence. See Anderson's Lucy's book. Emma was thus the scribe for the very opening narratives of the lost pages, where Lehi's family, including Sariah, were first introduced, and where the narrative of Nephi slipping in through the walls of Jerusalem to get the brass plates would have first been told. This made her the first scribe for the translation of the Book of Mormon as a whole. Emma's accounts also tell us where they did this work together in their marital home, most likely in the house's low-ceilinged chamber or upper room, sometimes preparing the room by hanging veils marking off sacred spaces. See Anton's 1834 and 1841 accounts. Both have Martin Harris retelling him that Joseph transcribed the characters in the garret of a farmhouse behind a curtain or veil, and Charles Anton E.D. Howe, February 17, 1834 in Vogel, and Charles Anton to Thomas Winthrop Coit, April 3, 1841 in Vogel. Harmony area locals reported to Frederick Mather that Joseph also dictated the translation to Reuben Hale, Martin Harris, and others in the little low chamber of his house. Frederick Tree Mather, the early Mormons. Joe Smith operates at Susquehanna. Right back to here, there we are. For the biblically minded Joseph, doing such sacred work in the chamber of the house would almost surely have evoked Jesus' upper room celebration of the Feast of Unleavened Bread that inaugurated both Passover and the institution of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. And it foreshadowed Joseph's own later institution of the endowment in the upper room of his Nauvoo red brick store. See Mark 14, verses 12 through 25, and Luke 22, verses 7 through 23. The accounts are less specific on when Joseph and Emma's work shifted focus from transcribing and examining the plate's alphabet to full-blown translation of the opening narratives of the Nephite record. Joseph placed the start of his subsequent translation work with Martin Harris in about mid-April, but as detailed below and in Chapter 5, by this point, Joseph had been working for a number of days and dictating to Emma and his other early scribes. See, a more precise timeline for the translation of this work on the initial manuscript will be explored in Chapter 5. While no source identifies the date when Joseph and Emma began translating the account of Lehi's Exodus, the dates that can be identified earlier in their bringing forth of the Book of Mormon, evince a clear pattern that enables us to conjure intelligently when they began translating. On the timetable presented from the historical sources in chapters 1 and 2, each step in Joseph and Emma's early work of bringing forth the Book of Mormon was keyed to dates significant in the Hebrew Bible. Emphasis added in the text, by the way. Particularly dates significant in Jewish festival calendar. At the Feast of Trumpets, they retrieved the plates from the stone ark. On the Day of Atonement, Joseph brought the plates home. At the Feast of Tabernacles, Joseph looked into the priestly interpreters and sent for Martin to request he take characters from the plates to the learned. And 40 days after recovering the plates on trumpets, Joseph and Emma removed the plates from Manchester environs in which they had lain for 1,500 years and took them to Harmony. Given that the first three events in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon were keyed to the exact dates of Jewish festivals, and the fourth event was keyed to one of those festivals at the biblically significant interval of 40 days, we might reasonably anticipate that further events in the Book of Mormon's coming forth would be similarly keyed to such festival occasions. Joseph and Emma's initial translation work, a few weeks before mid-April, suggests that such a sacred occasion in the Jewish calendar that would fit the pattern of their earlier work and befit a work written to the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. On March 29th, Passover began with the time for the slaying of the Paschal Lamb. So that, I think, is really good inference, because by all accounts, he knew, as he said, the first four events coinciding with specific Jewish dates, etc., and festivals and Passover and such. It makes sense that now when he's inferring that when did the translation next continue, that it follows the same pattern. And like he said in the early introduction chapters, I know the first couple of readings that I had were pretty boring because it was the introduction stuff, but I think it's important because, this is a scholarly work. The idea is that he's inferring this, but there's good reason for it. And I agree. All right, new subsection. I will prepare unto my servant a stone. Although Joseph had shielded himself and the plates from view while transcribing their characters, Emma makes no mention of a curtain as Joseph dictated the translation to her. Instead, it is evident from her accounts that during this time he principally used his brown seer stone, which, unlike the interpreters, he was not obliged to keep hidden from the view of others. See Joseph Smith III's The Last Host Testimony of Sister Emma. Unlike Joseph's earlier efforts at copying an alphabet of the Reformed Egyptian symbols, translating from the plates by way of this seer stone did not require him to work directly with the plates. Instead, he received a visual or conceptual revelation of the book's contents. Thus, the scene in the translation room, as Emma described it to her son Joseph III, was as follows, quote, "In writing for your father, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him, he sitting with his face buried in his hat, with the stone in it, and dictating hour after hour, with nothing between us. The plates often lay on the table without any attempt at concealment, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth, which I had given him to fold them in." See the book, and it gives its reference. So again, Joseph Smith III's book. While an observer, unacquainted with Joseph's translation process, may think he seemed more interested in what it was at the bottom of his hat than at what was on the plates, a glimpse into the world of seeing provides context to his actions. We can better understand the outside, observable translation process, peering into seer stones in a hat, by considering the inside, unobservable process, its phenomenological and symbolic dimensions, i.e., what he experienced and how that experience was supposed to affect him. Subsection Cite to translate. The process of translation, and also that of receiving "Thus saith the Lord" revelation through the seer stone, involved the term seer stone, suggests a visual experience of some kind for the person using it. Various reports from people who were positioned to hear Joseph's account of the experience indicate that as he looked at the seer stone, he saw the words of translation. Like his use of the seer stone, this idea that Joseph spiritually saw the translation has sometimes been a matter of controversy. Joseph's visionary seeing of the translation is believed by some to exclude him from having any role in formulating the language of the translation, such as the selection of words. This exclusion of a role for Joseph Smith in the process is viewed as problematic for three reasons. First, such a process would not make Joseph Smith a translator at all, but merely a reader of the Book of Mormon. Second, portions of the translated Book of Mormon text are written in Joseph Smith's rural, upstate New York idiom, including grammatical errors common to that idiom. See Royal Skousen, the original language of the Book of Mormon, upstate New York dialect, King James English, or Hebrew. Third, such a process would contradict Joseph's "Thus saith the Lord" revelations that describe the process of revelation and translation as allowing and requiring the prophet's mind to be active in these processes. Footnote 11 says, a revelation through Joseph Smith to Oliver Cowdery during the translation of the Book of Mormon instructs Cowdery on how to translate, stating that as part of the process of arriving at the translation text, you must study it out in your mind. That's Doctrine and Covenants 9, verses 6 through 9. And November 1831 revelation through Joseph Smith refers to his revelations as being in his language, which, because of its imperfections, other church members wished to improve upon or express beyond. Doctrine and Covenants 67, verse 5. Each of these revelations characterizes the process of divine manifestation as one in which the revelator's mind is active in clothing that manifestation in words. Back to the text. We will see that there is ample evidence that Joseph Smith's translation process did involve a visionary component. But first, we should distinguish the fact of Joseph Smith seeing from interpretations of how that experience is produced. Research in visual perception indicates that the experience of sight does not occur in the eyes, but, like the experience of seeing something in memory, in the mind. Oh, okay, let me reread that. So, yeah, let me reread that paragraph because it'll make more sense at the end there. We will see that there is ample evidence that Joseph Smith's translation process did involve a visionary component. But first, we should distinguish the fact of Joseph Smith seeing from interpretations. So, the fact Joseph Smith seeing from interpretations of how that experience is produced. Research in visual perception indicates that the experience of sight does not occur in the eyes, but, like the experience of seeing something in memory, it's in the mind. This research also demonstrates that the experience of sight involves the mind's active construction of images, rather than merely their passive reception. You can see for a fuller discussion of these issues as they relate to the translation of the Book of Mormon, see Brant Gardner, The Gift and Power, Translating the Book of Mormon. So he's making the argument that just because some people argue, well, he's not really translating because he's just reading it. And also because it's really odd because the plates would be on the table and he's looking into a hat, what's really funny is Don Bradley is going to go into why that's significant later, but because I've seen a little preview about what he talked about on Word Radio. But that's cool. I never actually thought about the importance of the distinction of, look, your sight, yes, you receive images to your eyes, but your eyes they may be the receptors, but it's reconstructed in your mind to actually see images when your eyes are open. But similarly, memory works the same way. Like when you're recalling, oh, what color dress did my wife wear on such and such a day? It's your eyes will, if you're really trying to focus on an image, your eyes will flick to like one area and go, depending on what type of memory you're recalling. And then you'll visualize it, and it will come to mind visually, even if it's not literally in front of your two eyes, but through your mental mind and perception. I never thought of that distinction, and I never thought of that as an issue. But now that he brings it up, I'm like, well, that's cool. And that actually makes a lot of sense. So he's of course still putting to mind the idea that, hey, he is seeing something visually, and he's also seeing it reconstruct, and he also has to use his mind to interpret things as part of it. So anyway, let me continue. The common understanding of visual perception would allow Joseph to see something on the seer stone only if the stone emitted photons that struck his retina. But in reality, his seeing the words written in the ink of spiritual light, David Whitmer, An Address to All Believers in Christ, requires no such thing. We do not know the underlying process by which these images were produced, nor the extent to which Joseph Smith's own cognitive and spiritual faculties were used in generating them. The question of whether Joseph Smith saw symbolic images of the translated words is entirely distinct from how those images were produced. Ooh, this is really good how he's parsing this out. So he's like saying, yeah, we don't know if it's actually like literal photons from the stone striking his eyeballs or something else, but that doesn't matter as much as whether he saw something, because we may not know how it was produced, but whether he saw something, that we can determine. This is, I bet, what he's about to say. Anyways, were Joseph's cognitive processes involved in selecting or crafting what he saw? That Joseph Smith could have worked out or studied out, again referencing D&C 9.8, the words of translation, then seen them reflected back to him through the interpreters and presumably also the seer stone, was suggested by Elder B.H. Roberts in the beginning of the 20th century. Quote, the translation thought out in the seer's mind may also have been reflected in the interpreters and held there until recorded by the amanuensis. That is a new word to me that I'll need to look up. Amanuensis. All right. So it may have been held until recorded by the amanuensis, Amanuensis, all of which would be incalculably helpful. But since the translation is thought out in the mind of the seer, it must be thought out in such thought signs as are at his command, expressed in such speech forms as he is the master of. End quote. That's B.H. Roberts' Defense of the Faith and the Saints. Amanuensis. Oh, I do have my phone on me. Let me look that up right now. All right, learning time for all of us boys and girls. Amanuensis. Wow. This is why I read good old books. Like I said, like you heard my rant earlier about how information's being lost just because we have so much of it on the internet today. This is why you gotta keep old books around. That way the stuff doesn't get lost. All right. M-A-N-U-E. Amanuensis. Oh, I was close. Amanuensis. Once employed to take dictation or copy manuscripts, a clerk's secretary, or stenographer, or scribe?
Amanuensis.
Oh, see, it's amanuensis. Not bad for a first try. Amanuensis, so the scribe. So it's held there until it's recorded by the amanuensis. All right. Whatever the deeper information processes underlying the translation, the evidence is overwhelming that Joseph Smith experienced and reported to others a visual or visionary aspect to his translation process. Joseph left no written first-hand details of his translation process, but referred to it in distinctively visual terms, describing himself as reading the plates through spectacles and a seer stone, and by virtue of his gift as a seer, a word whose very construction denotes one who sees. Mosiah 8, verses 16 and 17. One of his revelations, even describing him having power and sight to translate, Doctrine and Covenants 3:12. Footnote 15 states, in its earliest known versions, this revelation, Doctrine and Covenants 3:12, originally given circa, meaning around July 1828, says Joseph Smith had been given right and power to translate the Book of Mormon. This was intentionally changed to sight and power, but it is unclear whether this was an evolution of the text or the restoration of a lost original reading. The more you know. In addition to implying that he saw something while translating, Joseph almost surely told those around him during the translation something about his process and experience. It is difficult to imagine Joseph doing something as odd and counterintuitive as looking into his hat day after day while translating without offering any rationale for this practice to his wife or other scribes and companions who assisted him. A number of those who assisted with or witnessed the translation and others who spoke with Joseph about it left accounts detailing the process, likely as it had been described to them by Joseph. 3 of those who spoke with Joseph Smith about the process, David Whitmer, Ezra Booth, and Truman Coe, reported explicitly that he told them he saw the words. Footnote 16. Ezra Booth, an alienated Mormon writing in 1831, reported Joseph Smith's claim that, in translating, the subject stands before his eyes in print. Ezra Booth, Mormonism, Volume 3. Kirtland minister Truman Coe, whose account of visual translation via the interpreters will be given in full below, concludes that the account with, this is the relation as given by Joseph Smith, Truman Coe, in Mormonism. David Whitmer reported that Joseph said that in the darkness of his hat a spiritual light would shine forth from the seer stone, and something like a parchment would appear before Joseph, upon which was a line of characters from the plates. Under it, the translation in English. J.L. Trogber Jr.'s Testimony of David Whitmer. All right. In addition to these second-hand reports are 22 other accounts given by 8 different persons, which say Joseph saw the translation without explicitly identifying him as their source. Joseph is, however, the implied source of all such accounts, since those making the accounts either got their information from Joseph or from others they believed got information from him. Since Joseph alone had the experience of translation, only information believed to trace to him could have been considered reliable. These witnesses include 3 of Joseph's translation scribes, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and John Whitmer. His brother, William, translation witnesses of David Whitmer and Elizabeth Whitmer Cowdery, and a benefactor of the translation effort, Joseph Knight, Sr. Footnote 17. These accounts may be found in John W. Welch's Opening the Heavens, Accounts of Divine Manifestations. And he lists a ton of documents. Yeah. The light which shineth in darkness. What did Joseph see? Joseph reportedly saw The English translation for each reformed Egyptian character from the plates written on the surface of his seer stone, not in ink, but in letters of spiritual light. Footnote 18. David Whitmer reported Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat, put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. Whitmer, an address. Another account by Whitmer speaks of the translation appearing in bright, luminous letters. James H. Hart, letter to the editor in Vogel. In one of the earliest detailed accounts of how Joseph Smith translated, Joseph Knight Sr., who helped support the Smith family financially during the translation, wrote, the way he translated was he put the Urim and Thummim into his hat and darkened his eyes, and he would take a sentence, and it would appear in the bright Roman letters. Then he would tell the writer, and he would write it. Joseph Knight Sr., Manuscript of the History of Joseph Smith in Vogel. Joseph's seer stone was like that of the prophesied Gezilim, which was to shine forth in darkness into light. See Alma 37:23. The accounts of Joseph's translation practices suggest that he could perceive and focus on the spiritual light more easily in the absence of distracting physical light. Footnote 19. Accounts of the light shining in the darkness are given in a previous note. A number of... Sorry, that just reminded me of something that's way off topic. In Fallout 3, there's a DLC called Honest Hearts, where one of the characters has... He's based out of Ogden, Utah, and so in the game he's Mormon, and he's a really cool character in the game, and it's interesting because he has his pistols that he enforces his will on the world, which is called the light shining in darkness, and I thought that's funny. So there's a long history of members of the church in video games, because the University of Utah was one of the first places to really push computer science, which led to a lot of them growing into making video games. And plus, nerd culture is rampant in Utah. But anyways, this light shining in darkness line is fascinating to me, because this means that a lot of these other parables and such have deeper meaning because of this phrase. And it's just fascinating. Okay, so to finish the footnote, accounts of the light night shining in the darkness are given in the previous footnote. A number of other accounts also mention Joseph using his hat to exclude the light. See, for example, William Smith in William Smith on Mormonism book. A dark room would have thus been optimal place for his work as a translator, but such conditions would have hindered the scribe's work. Joseph adopted a compromise measure, working in a well-lit room so his scribe could see the page, while using a hat to shield his seer stone from light. To do this, he placed the stone in the bottom of his stovepipe hat and rested his face over the brim, enabling him to look at the stone in the dark. The effect reportedly wrought by the spiritual light within the darkness was transformative. The Book of Mormon hieroglyphs, as Joseph and other witnesses described them appearing on the plates. Wait, what? The effect reportedly wrought by the spiritual light within the darkness was transformative. The Book of Mormon hieroglyphs, as Joseph and other witnesses described them appearing on the plates, were set out in black against a bright background of gold. Oh, interesting. Okay, there's a footnote here too, but conversely, the translated images or words that appeared as Joseph looked at the seer stone occluded in his hat were light against darkness. Thus, through the stone, the record's original, untranslated state was inverted. Its meaning, previously hidden in characters literally and figuratively as dark as Egypt, oh, there's two footnotes now stood written in strokes of light, words ablaze against a black page of ambient darkness. Third footnote. Like the development of a negative into a photograph transposing dark with bright, Joseph Smith's process of translation rendered in place of the opaque hieroglyphs that had baffled the learned professors lucid English words intelligible to the unlearned prophet. Okay, now for the footnotes, especially during a cool section like that. All right, so the first of these was when he was talking about the bright background of gold. Orson Pratt reported that 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon who attested to handling the golden plates described the plates as being about the thickness of common tin, about 8 inches in length, and from 6 to 7 in breadth, and having upon each side of the leaves of the plates fine engravings, which were stained with a black hard stain so as to make the letters more legible and be easier to read. Orson Pratt, January 2nd, 1859, Journal of Discourses, 731. Second footnote was talking about the characters literally and figuratively as dark as Egypt. The phrase dark as Egypt, a 19th century idiom, was used by Joseph Smith to describe the total darkness he experienced on looking into the hat after Martin Harris surreptitiously swapped out the seer stones for another similar appearing rock. See Edward Stevenson's account of his 1870 interview with Martin Harris in Edward Stevenson's One of the Three Witnesses. This is an interesting point that he mentioned on Ward Radio when he was doing interviews with the guys there. A lot of people, when digging into anti-Mormon tropes about, Martin Harris was just a believing shill, that's completely incorrect. Martin Harris was an extremely smart man, and he was wealthy, and he was critical and skeptical of the process and things. And he wanted to figure out, how did this work and things like that. And so he did this test to Joseph Smith. He took out a seer stone, put a different one in his hat. And so when Joseph Smith went back to it, he's like, well, this is dark as an Egypt tomb in here. So he wanted to make sure that even though, he was putting up all this money for this stuff, he wanted to make sure, this is real. And so this is a very interesting story because I didn't know this before. And Don Bradley talking on Ward Radio. And so the concept of Martin Harris being some sort of shill is not the case. He is a critical thinker and always has been. Like everyone's testament about Martin Harris was that he was a smart and honest individual. And so for him to be just thought of as someone who is stupid and easily duped is not the case. So I wanted to bring that up. I don't know if he'll go into that later, but it was in the footnote. I figured it would be very interesting. And the third one had to do with, now stood the written strokes of light, the blaze against the black page of the ambient darkness. Compare this to Alma 37:32. I will prepare unto my servant Gezelem a stone which shall shine forth in darkness unto light, that I may discover unto my people who serve me, that I may discover unto them the works of their brethren. So that's where all that comes from. Whew. That is a cool stuff there. All right, so to continue on. This illumination of the visual faculties by which Joseph perceived the spiritual light both represented and brought about the illumination of his understanding. In both vision and knowledge, Joseph went from uncomprehending darkness into light. Deep, man. It is perhaps this unity of the symbol. Yeah, God's good at that. Perhaps it is this unity of the symbol with the process being experienced and symbolized that is most striking about Joseph Smith's reported experience as a translator. Yeah. Several of Joseph Smith's early revelations, which were also given through the spiritual light shining in darkness from the seer stone, evoke and develop this symbolism inherent in their mode of delivery. One such revelation through Joseph in 1829 for his brother Hiram instructed Hiram to believe in the power of Jesus Christ, or in my power, which speaketh unto thee. For behold, it is I that speaketh. Behold, I am the light which shineth in the darkness, and by my power I give these words unto thee. Doctrine and Covenants, chapter 11, verses 10 through 11. Thus the medium through which this revelation was received, the words of light appearing on the stone amid darkness, is involved in the revelation itself to authenticate the revelation's message and identify its divine author. The luminous words seen by Joseph in the seer stone were given by the power of him who is the light which shineth in darkness, the power of Jesus Christ. Yeah. All right, sorry. This is good stuff. Next is, this is a very short section, but there's a bunch before a long. And next it talks about the interpreters, and it has diagrams. That one's a big one. All right, so I'll finish this small one that has footnotes in there, and we'll call it a day for today. But this is good stuff. All right, written by the finger of God. A revelation to Joseph Smith 5 years after he obtained the golden plates similarly underscores the divinity of both the Book of Mormon and his early first-person divine revelations by invoking their mode of delivery. The Lord, in this revelation, refers to the Book of Mormon and the former commandments which I have given as that which I have written in Doctrine and Covenants 84:57. So basically, when the Lord is referring to the Book of Mormon and the former commandments, he says that when he's talking about that in that which had been written in Doctrine and Covenants, that's what the Lord is referring to. Whew. Affirming these texts' authority by identifying himself as their author, he having spiritually written them as they appeared on the seer stone. Footnote 23. God is similarly quoted in the Bible using the phrase, which I have written, with reference to the law, which he wrote for Moses on the tablets at Sinai. See Exodus 24:12 and Hosea 8:12. The Book of Mormon version of Isaiah uses similar phrasing, varying from the King James Version reference to the righteous as the people in whose heart is my law, with the reading, the people in whose heart I have written my law. Ooh. That's Isaiah 51:7 and 2 Nephi 8:7. The symbolic value of spiritual writing appearing on the stone exceeds merely identifying the divine source of the Book of Mormon and the Revelations. The writing of God's word on stone also evokes one of the foundational stories of biblical religion, the writing of the Ten Commandments by the finger of God on the stone tablets at Sinai. Footnote. The phenomenon of something shining after coming into contact with divine presence is another parallel between Joseph Smith's translation, phenomenology, and the story of God's writing on his finger in the stone tablets at Mount Sinai, as described in the book of Exodus. After Moses' exposure to the presence of God, as God touched the stone tablets, his face shined. Exodus 34. 29 through 30. The grooves of the stone tablets where God had written were subject to the same literally illuminating divine influence, but the narrative does not report that these also shined. But this is precisely the effect of his touch in the parallel incident of the Lord touching the stones brought to him by the brother of Jared on another mountaintop. See Ether 3. It is no wonder, then, that in Joseph Smith's revelation through the seer stone were known to the earliest days of the saints as commandments, and hence their first compilation as the Book of Commandments. Good point. The biblical parallel was not lost on the early saints, nor was its implication that the spiritual communications that appeared on Joseph's seer stone were no less authoritative and divine than those written by God's finger on Moses' stone tablets. Yeah, good points. Good points. And wow. The more parallels that he finds to things happening on specific dates, symbols combining together. Like this is the way cool thing about symbols. Symbols can mean a lot to the people who are going through stuff, and it's very important for them to be able to read symbols at any point in their life to get more out of them. And that's what I really love and appreciate about speaking in symbols and symbology. People who are critical of religious aspects in symbol and symbology can say, well, it's kind of like confirmation bias. You can read into it what you want. And it's like, yes, you can. And there's no problem with that. I don't, someone who's an atheist is saying, oh, it's all hogwash and and you just read into what we want. Yes and no. And here's the reason why yes and no. Yes, for the people who, hey, I'm reading this parable for this time in my life, and it touched me, and it allowed me to see things better. For them, yes, they are reading into it what they want. But did you notice something else there? They were touched by it. There's something in the Spirit of God when He's trying to whisper to us about certain things, that it takes the mundane things that we read every day and strikes us like lightning, like pure intelligence, like what we need, whether that's a pure unadulterated thought to the mind, or whether it's the feeling of love that we need to get us through the hard time and the support that we need. It changes the mundane into the holy. It takes a story that we're so removed from, like the Jewish wedding ceremony, that we have just no concept of how it ties into all these different stories, that He can take even those things we're so removed from and make something divine for us, for what we need at the moment. But then there are other times where the confluence of symbolism is no mere coincidence, where, as God knows from the end, from the beginning, it's like, don't you see? It fulfills this, it fulfills this, it fulfills this, it fulfills this, it fulfills this. But no, you don't want to take that as anything more than just coincidence. It's like there's a point where it strains the incredulity of anyone who's atheist to sit there and go, well, it just all happened that way. It's like, I think it was prepared beforehand. And whether that was fulfilled on purpose, like that was something Don Bradley didn't say in there, was there are times where Joseph Smith could have tried to fulfill, like step into and fulfill prophecy knowingly. But about the dates of when he was pulling the Book of Mormon out of the ground and making sure he took it home, and when he started translating, it doesn't mention whether Joseph Smith actually knew. I mean, if you think about how in the story he was uneducated and he didn't know that there was a wall around Jerusalem, kind of stuff, it makes me wonder how cognizant and aware he was of all these religious festivals and their timing, because he grew up obviously in Protestant fervor in the Northeast of the United States. How much talk is there of Jewish festivals? And so to me, I don't think Joseph would have been that cognizantly aware of it at the time. But of course, Don Bradley doesn't say anything about that. I don't think he has anything to comment on it either way, because if he did, I'm sure he would. Like, he is an amazing scholar. He dives into these original sources. He's a cool dude. Again, you can see his interviews on Ward Radio. But I don't know. But it's really fascinating how the confluence of all these symbolisms come together, and it's just like, holy cow, that is way more profound than you think. And so, again, there's a lot in life that easily, hands down, shows God's loving understanding of each of us and His willingness to be there for us individually, constantly. And I'm just in awe about it. The next section talks about the interpreters, and that's going to be way cool. And he has diagrams, so I'll show them, since we have video format. And he actually described that the drawing of the interpreters that he has in here is slightly off. I'll explain it when we get to it. But otherwise, I sure hope you guys have a great Christmas evening. I'm sure tomorrow morning, since we're going to be doing presents and all this, I probably won't read then. But yeah, I've got some work, literal work, for my job today to do. And I love you lots. You guys have a great day.